The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Oregon Housing and Community Services Multifamily Energy Program, Training on Intentional Design for Energy Efficiency. The Multifamily Energy Program offers energy efficiency technical support and incentives to new and retrofit projects serving low-income multifamily Oregonians. This is Stephanie Berklin, your host for today's training. This training will be delivered by the dynamic duo of Matt Christie and Dan Wildenhouse. Just a few housekeeping notes and instructions on how to use GoToWebinar system. Today's webinar will be recorded and available on the program website within several days after the presentation. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. If you'd like to ask a question throughout the training, please use the questions chat box on the GoToWebinar panel. We will do our best to answer questions throughout in the order that they are received. At the end of the training, we will open the audio line up for questions. In order to participate in the discussion, please enter your audio PIN. It's located in the center panel of your screen, and raise your hand located in the meeting panel, so you can be unmuted and join the conversation. Alternatively, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box as well. Today's webinar is the first in a series of trainings towards supporting multifamily energy program participants and multifamily professionals. We will cover topics relevant to both existing buildings and new construction projects. We have two upcoming trainings after today's, one on August 9th geared towards energy auditing, and another August 23rd on energy modeling best practices. All of the trainings will be advertised in the program's monthly newsletter and also posted on the program's website. If you are currently not receiving our monthly newsletter, you can register on the program's website homepage or contact one of the program representatives. Without further ado, we will begin today's training on intentional design for energy efficiency. I would like to introduce Dan Wildenhouse and Matt Christie, both members of the Multifamily Energy Program team, as presenters for today. Dan and Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Stephanie. This is Dan Wildenhouse. I'll do a quick intro and pass it off to Matt here in just a second. So today we are going to talk about intentional design for energy efficiency and the recommended practices to fold this into your business. Now, why call it intentional design? We know that we have some architects, designers, and green building professionals on the call today, and you're probably familiar with integrated design or integrated project delivery. We'll get into that in just a minute, the real differences between these things. But what we really want to cover today is the concept we want you thinking about two primary things. How intentional is your adoption and integration of energy efficiency measures? And second, how are you currently ensuring that they make it into your plans, the scopes of work, into on-site installation? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt for the first section, and he's going to talk about the why behind this.
Thanks, Dan. So this is Matt Christie. Thanks, Steph, as well, for hosting this and putting this all together. As Dan said, we're going to walk through the why, and then the what, the how, the when, the who. We're going to have a handy-dandy little cheat sheet of those little drops as we go through to keep track of where we are in the presentation for those of you following along at home. Going to start by focusing on the why. Why is this worth our time? Why are we considering this? What is the benefit of going through this kind of process? First and foremost, in the construction industry, there is a decent amount of waste. And what intentional design and or integrated design, as we said, we're going to get into the details of the nuances of how we're parsing those two terms in a little bit. But with either, you can really reduce that waste. That waste comes from actual construction waste itself, of too much product delivery. It comes from waste of time, of too many people, of sequencing errors, of people coming back and redoing work or doing callbacks or post-verification repairs and fixes. There's all sorts of applications of waste within this process. And by doing an intentional design process ahead of time, you can really stem that waste down, make the best value of the resources you have in front of you, both the materials as well as the human resources, the smart people and the trades that you're hiring. You can reduce utility and maintenance cost, and you can really lead to a well-coordinated design and a well-coordinated design follow-through by following some of these best principles. So the good news is that there's great evidence out there that projects that have gone through either an integrated design process or an intentional design process have better outcomes. They're able to reduce depending on the study you're looking at, there's a couple that we have here from the UK Office of Government, 10% savings on the cost of construction on a single project. Some other materials we've looked at have said there's 30% savings potential across the construction over a series of projects. You can really reduce that design cost, reduce that implementation cost, and still adhere to advanced design principles and reaching more advanced goals on energy efficiency, on design, on everything else. So the value of this to the owner and the developer is that it reduces costs. It ensures that there's minimal changes and increased oversight to the construction schedule and the quality of work. It ensures that the principles and the intentions you're trying to put forward in your project actually have follow through down the entire course of events and get implemented properly in the field, verified in the field, that all of that intention design actually gets implemented in your buildings themselves. And the process gives a great feedback loop of construction cost, performance data, the kind of information that helps your business practice operate appropriately and increase profits. One great example of this is from a firm called Green Canopy Homes. They were a small, one or two small a year builder that expanded and tried to get into that middle range of 10 to 20, focusing on townhomes quite a bit and that kind of process. And they really wanted to reach that niche market of green, of energy efficiency. And they did very well by following an intentional design process to achieve that. They built a checklist process. They started doing integrated design meetings ahead of time. They did a sort of a post-construction analysis of a feedback loop of did the items that they tried to put through those checklists actually occur, and what needs to happen on the next project to make it even better. And that loop there has put them in a position where they're building 4 or Emerald built green homes repeatedly at the same construction costs as just built to code homes that they were building prior to switching this process. And they've seen that value, and we're hopeful you can see the same kind of value by going through this as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dan.
Thank you, Matt. Now we're going to get into what we actually mean by some of these terms. So we'll dive in a little bit into this difference between intentional and integrated design. But first, let's just talk about at a minimum. We don't want to scare you away. This isn't the kind of thing where we're saying you need to, dive into the deep end without your floaty arms on. This is more about let's take this in an incremental step. So at a minimum, what are we hoping you'll take away from this? We hope you can start off by committing to a pre-construction meeting. So before hammers start hitting nails, can you get a meeting together that makes sure you have the right people in attendance, meaning your key trades, your designers, your energy consultants. And we really want to see that the plans get reviewed before any construction happens, that energy efficiency measures are included in both the plans and the scopes of work for all the trades, and then key responsibilities are assigned to make sure that this will actually happen as it's designed. We really want to hammer home that having the right people in the right meetings and getting the right responsibilities into the right scopes is the magic that makes this happen. So now let's talk about this difference between intentional and integrated design. Those of you that are from the architecture background or who have been in green building or energy consulting are, again, probably familiar with integrated design as a topic. And some of you with your Sigma 6 black belts and lean production kind of training are probably familiar with integrated project delivery. Today, we're really focusing on the intentional design, kind of the first step here. Really making sure that we've got roles and responsibilities are very clear and assigned, and that a champion leads some sort of pre-design meeting that really puts these things into place and helps ensure that what is spoken for at the beginning is actually carried through the entire process. Now that said, you don't have to stop at intentional design. That's our minimum. is it turns out the value actually increases the more you adopt the integrated design process. It allows you to think about things in different terms. It really focuses on being able to adjust as you go and having really open channels of communication. A version of this probably already exists for you. The problem is for most developers and owners, they don't have it written down. It's not formalized. It's an informal thing, and this allows for gaps to happen. It allows for mistakes to be able to be repeated historically over time. So formalizing it is a key to helping improve your designs and lower your costs. Integrated design can actually open plenty of benefits for a minimal or even zero incremental cost when performed repeatedly, as the example that Matt just gave with Green Canopy Homes. On top of all that, depending on the programs you're in, some programs such as LEED, National Green Building Standard, some of the others similar to that actually will give you rewards in terms of points, or in some cases even incentives for doing integrated design or early design assistance meetings or design charrettes. Currently, the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, we don't have a specific incentive for this, but if you've looked at how our incentives work, you get a greater incentive per kWh saved the more whole building of an approach that you take to this. And we are firm believers that intentional design is a critical piece for those of you following the whole building path, for whether it's retrofit or new construction. So in a sense, this is one of those key pieces to helping make sure you're cracking open the higher incentives per kWh saved. We can also compare kind of the traditional process. We're going to do this in a couple different ways. Right now, we're going to just look at the parts, traditional versus integrated processes. What jumps out at you? When I look at this, I see three things right off the bat that scream different and new and probably a benefit, and that is starting earlier in the process. The earlier we can start, the more cost effective this is going to be. I see that it's about being structured. We've mentioned this several times already. The ability to be repeatable is a critical thing. And so having a quality structure is what's going to allow you to do this. And finally, it's designed to be collaborative. In fact, that word is on the screen multiple times. So it really is a way to engage in, as Matt said earlier, use the good human resources you have. There are some really smart people on your trades, at your energy consultant, with all your design teams. Being able to make the best use of those brains is part of the collaborative. And quite honestly, I spent 15 years in the construction industry. When we got to do jobs that started with intentional design or integrated design, it was honestly more fun for everyone as well, because everyone has a slightly higher degree of buy-in and is a little bit more on board with making this project work. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Matt, who's going to talk through the next section with you.
Thanks, Dan. So on the how side, first sort of go through the anatomy of intentional design, some of the big, and we've already spoken of these concepts in prior slides. There's a bit of a rehash as well, and that'll come up as we go to keep pushing through various themes. But once again, the intention here is to host a meeting that has the following goals. Confirm and reaffirm the project goals themselves. What are you trying to accomplish with this development? Is it a green program adherence? Is it a zero net energy metric? Is it a meet this particular part of the market? Is it a certain cost goal? What are those broad program goals? What are the energy efficiency goals within them, and how can you get there? Then from that, make sure you discuss the challenges, the perceived challenges as well as the real ones, and anticipate the issues that are going to come up. What's going to be hard about that design to accomplish? Where are you going to run into problems? Are your desires for high energy efficiency or zero net energy going to bump against your budget aggressively? And you have to figure out how to make that match and maybe shift or adjust goals or figure out a different plan to meet that. And then, of course, brainstorm the potential solutions. How are you going to solve some of those problems? What are the ways of accomplishing that? Recognize and plan for construction training needs. If you're doing anything advanced, anything new, anything slightly outside of the general construction norms, How do you plan for that? How do you deal with the sequencing of that? How do you make sure that every trade that's involved in that specific new advanced energy feature is aware of it, understands the intention behind it, and understands their role in seeing it through? Then review in-field verification items. As we all know, with energy efficiency in particular, it is necessary to verify that what was specified actually is what was installed, and that all those pieces came together through some level of verification. And so planning for that ahead of time, knowing what needs to be verified and when, is valuable. You can't verify that insulation was appropriately put into the cavities if you've already put your sheetrock up. So you have to figure out the timing of verifications. You got to plan for that ahead of time and know what it is. And then, of course, the basics. Take notes and distribute up on action items. Make sure that this meeting, what came out of it, then has the chance to have follow through and finish up. And the length of the meeting and the time, it varies on the size and scope of the process and the project itself. And maybe longer meetings for large projects or ones you're doing a full integrated design versus an intentional design. But this can be, that aspect of it is variable. So planning for that meeting in the pre-construction support is valuable. If this sounds like a lot, the truth is you're already doing this to some level. You're already gathering your team together to make sure that everyone is on the same page. You probably host a safety meeting. You can hijack that exact meeting and extend it or build upon it. If you're already bringing your trades and your design folks together for other purposes, build on top of that. You're already doing a lot of these aspects or a lot of the machinations of getting an integrated design meeting together at some other aspect. It could be informal conference calls, it could be just through email, but you're coordinating these things. What we're suggesting is a broader structure to bring that together. Before you get to the meeting, though, once you've had this scheduled, there is a little bit of prep to make sure that you have everything you need in front of your fingertips to make the best use of that time and having all of those people in one room or around one table or at the job site together. There's a lot of, as I said, the formality of this can be fairly variable based on the scope of your project, what you're trying to accomplish out of it. Some of the key things that we've seen of having highly valuable to a proficient energy efficiency design meeting is, one, you need a champion. You need someone whose role it is to make sure that the energy efficiency aspects stay in the limelight and are thoughtful throughout all the other aspects that are happening in any of these meetings. It's very easy for energy efficiency components to fall out of the scope of work without anyone realizing that those were intended from the beginning. So having a champion whose job it is to see it through, highly valuable. Before you go to the meeting, it's necessary to kind of know the current status. Where are you? What are the preliminary goals ahead of time? What energy efficiency measures are already being considered? How does the siting of this and its orientation and where it exists, how does that compound? And what do you already know about this project ahead of time? And bring that to the table. That could be bringing a preliminary energy model. That's highly advised when you have enough information ahead of time to accomplish that. But be prepared of knowing where you stand ahead of time. And then make sure the champion builds that agenda that's inclusive of energy efficiency. It's only one aspect. You're also considering waste management, sequencing, aesthetics. If you're adhering to some incentive program or utility program, what are the rules about it? But make sure that energy efficiency is embedded in. And then also make sure you have the right people around the table. We're going to go into the who a little bit more detail later. And then after the design meeting, there's follow-up. Make sure that what was discussed in that meeting is embedded into everyone's scopes of work and reviewed and embedded into the plan sets, the scope of work. What do you need to do to follow through and make sure that the intentions set forth in that meeting get implemented into the actual construction? The biggest one there is the scopes of work. And we have a little example of that, a story of there's a project that was doing a slightly different version of rigid exterior insulation on their building outside of what they had normally done, what their typical trades had normally done. And they did a great job. They put a detail into page 31 of their construction plan of exactly how the flashing and the arrangement between the window and the rigid exterior and the flashing needed to go to meet everything. And they thought they were good. but they also didn't talk to their framers. They didn't sequence and arrange the sequencing between the person who was hanging the rigid exterior and the people that were hanging the windows and doing the flashing to make sure that those two were on the same page and understood this ahead of time. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, they install a window that the flashing is behind the rigid exterior, which doesn't do the intention that they set forth. So good intentions are great, but having those various steps of follow through. Make sure everyone's aware of it ahead of time. Make sure that that it's in their scopes of work. Make sure that it is in the plans themselves, and then verify that it got done before they do 40 windows, and after they've only done one. And you can get a success story rather than having to go back and spend a lot of time and money correcting an issue post construction. And so to kind of rehash all this, how do we set up for success? So the first step of the how is make sure you translate any energy efficiency or indoor air quality or comfort measures into people's responsibilities and then into their work scopes. Make sure you translate the goals of the project into the concrete actions of how you achieve those goals. Next, make sure you're understanding how those decisions impact budgets, materials, purchasing, sequencing, all the aspects of how that gets implemented, and that people know where it fits in their own business plans and in their work as trades to the project. Make sure that you have an internal coordinator or the champion that we talked about before to see this through and provide that quality control of how energy efficiency maintains as part of the project scope and project intentions. And then have the right people at the table for all of this. And once again, we're going to talk about the who in a couple of bullets. And with that, going back to Dan on the when.
Thank you, Matt. So when does it make sense to spend the time on this effort? Well, if you've been in the construction industry for any appreciable amount of time, you've probably heard one of these two sayings. The first is measure twice, cut once. Right? It's an old school saying, and every good carpenter has some variation of this. But this all stems from the same basics. Make sure you know what you're going to do before you try to do it. The second one is one I heard 20 some years ago when I was a youngster in this industry, and it really has stuck with me, and it's been kind of a guiding principle, and that's that 80% of all energy efficiency decisions are made before a hammer hits a nail. Again, the concept being it is really hard to think of how to put more insulation in a wall if you've already determined it's going to be a 2x6 framed wall. There's a physical limit to how much you can fit in there. But if you had identified much earlier that you actually wanted R30 in a wall, that would have impacted that design. So that's the real basics. Now let's get into a little bit more specifics. Please do not be afraid of this image. I'll walk you through it here. But this is kind of an important way for us to think about it. We want to think of three things. The left hand of the y-axis is showing us the design effort or effect that we're going to get from any work that we put into it. The right side of the y-axis is really going to be a scale of cost, whereas the x-axis, the horizontal, is being reflected over time. So let's take a look at that pink line first. And for those of you that may be colorblind, that is the one that is being associated with the ability to impact costs and outcomes. You'll notice that the majority of the effort and the effect are to the very left on the time and high on the design scale. We really put a lot of our effort very early in the process so that over the course of the construction, we need to spend less time thinking about the impacts to our costs and the impact to our outcomes. Next, let's take a look at the cost of design changes. One of the dirtiest set of words you can hear in construction is change order. Change orders, you just see dollar signs roll, you get trades starting to get upset, and typically finger pointing when you hear that term. And what we're seeing here is if you look at the red line of the cost of design changes, the further along in the process you are, the higher they are on the cost scale. It's really hard to make a cost change very, very late in the game. Next, we're going to take a look at the green line. This is the traditional design process. And the way I would think of about it is the hump of cost and effort happens in the latter half of the construction process in the traditional methodology. We spend a lot of our time, a lot of our sweat, blood, tears, and dollars in the second half of the process. We've already got the foundation in, we got trades coming and going, all permits are signed off. Now we're really cooking, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time and effort. Compare this now to the gray line and where the hump of cost and effort is for the intentional design or integrated design type processes. It happens much earlier. It happens in the first half of this. It happens before all permits have been pulled, before all trades start showing up on site. Heck, hopefully it happens before purchasing, before scopes of work are finalized, before sequencing schedules are finalized, and of course before hammers hit nails. When we can think of it this way, we're again shifting our effort to earlier in the process to maximize all of this. There's another way we can think about this, and that is, imagine if we redefined some of the common terms we use. In the traditional design, we talk about things we do pre-design and in schematic design. In integrated design, we would think of that as the conceptualization phase and the criteria design phases. Next, the design development in traditional, we'd actually think of as detailed design. Now we're actually taking everything we conceptualized and we're putting those details into place. The traditional process, we have our construction documents. These are the ways we track everything, make sure everything is legal, everything is square. We instead want to think of these as implementation documents, because now we're talking about how do we get from the design portion to the construction portion. And then lastly, we think in the construction, just a small amount of attention to permits and then actually building. In integrated design, we want to think of this as our agency coordination. We've moved on to a coordinating phase. Everyone already knows what their job is. Now it's a matter of just coordinating them to do it. If you've ever gone to theater, this is a really good example as well, or if you have a daughter or son who's taken a dance class or an acting class, how much work did they have to do before the big performance? The big performance is one night, 2 hours, but how many months of time did they have to take learning and being trained and going through choreography to get there? It's not that much different for our construction process. That brings us to a good example of the energy modeling. Typically, we've seen a lot of programs where the energy model is submitted to the program halfway through or near the end of construction. And they do that because that's when they had to do it. Instead of thinking about what if we do the energy model, at least the preliminary model, when we first get that first idea of the size of the building, where it's going to be located, and some of the minimum requirements that it may have associated with code and above code. For the intentional design process, taking that initial model, sitting down with the developer, the owner, and the designers, typically at least the architect and the HVAC designer, and performing optimization on the model in a live setting where people can actually see potential outcomes. What's the energy efficiency or proposed energy consumption of this building going to be like with this set of choices? Now, if you're in the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, you can imagine it as, what if I chose the smart home bundle? And I put in a smart home bundle. How does that change? Okay, what if instead of the smart home bundle, I'm going to look at the envelope bundle? And hopefully, once you start down this path, you can begin to see the benefit for the whole home path, for the whole building modeling path, where again, you're going to be able to maximize your incentives because you've put that time and effort into the design and really making even energy modeling, the optimization portion of it at least, a collaborative process with the folks who have the design mindset. There's nothing like showcasing the benefits to a building owner and developer really early in the process. It doesn't stop though there. Sometimes we start to see the process of construction happening and we realize the sequencing challenges or the materials that we initially purchased or that are available readily on the market don't align very easily with what our goals are for efficiency. So we've got a scenario here. This is a multifamily building apartment complex in New York. And they wanted to have passive house level walls. Now, when you do passive house level walls, one of the critical elements here is the conductive waste from the inside to the outside. Every junction of a rigid material is carefully scrutinized. Well, the panels that were readily available, unfortunately, had metal-to-metal connections. So they had to develop a process of how can we take the existing panel structure and put a process in place so that we can actually meet the passive house standard here. So when they did this, they created a team of 4 workers who practiced together on a mock-up version of this on the ground beforehand. And they looked at peeling off the membrane, bolting a connection plate with the proper thermal bridge spacers and air sealing gaskets, repatching with mineral wool, replacing the membrane, and taping it back up. They were able to then streamline this and make it a very fast and efficient process that they did repeatedly over and over. And they went panel by panel, performing this protocol very effectively throughout the entire project. They also included having someone that wasn't one of those 4 doing a quality check after them on every panel. That process allowed them to actually meet a much higher standard than they would have typically been able to meet, just modifying some of the parts and resources and products that were available on the market for them. So a little bit of ingenuity, a lot of planning, and then making it repeatable. In fact, 3,000 of them repeatable is a pretty critical piece. This really brings us to one of our favorite things to think about, which is the concept of mock-ups and physical models. On the left, you see a hyper-stylized version of an airplane model in a wind tunnel. I mean, why does Boeing do this, right? They do it for lots. Yes, cool pictures for sure, but they're really doing this because they want to look at things like how can we improve flight stability? How can we reduce wear and tear on our airplanes? How can we improve fuel mileage? How is this new carbon fiber wing going to perform in wind shear? They're able to actually do that with very few consequences by building a to-scale model and testing it in near real-world conditions. Well, we can do the same thing in construction. When you're talking about either passive house levels or you're going for the, say, the LEED environmental tobacco control credits, building a full mock-up, the central picture here, can be a real critical step. It allows all the trades to come in and get that 360 view of what you mean by the wall and the details and its connection to the floor and its connection to the ceiling. When you're going for really advanced levels, having a full mock-up like this is a pretty critical way, and again, very few consequences if it's not right, but a chance for the majority of trades and designers to kind of come together and look at this and also determine how would I verify that this was actually assembled correctly. More likely for most projects where you're just going to try to get some air sealing and some improved insulation and maybe a slightly smaller HVAC system because of your design, the very least being able to sheetrock at least 2 units out of your entire complex very early on so that you can come in with an infrared camera and a blower door and a smoke pencil and bring in the various trades that will be completing these units moving forward, and they can actually see real-world impacts of not having good air sealing details. They can see real-world impacts in infrared thermography images when they did not build with a good thermal break. That has been a pretty critical process we've seen to having really successful, tighter buildings, better insulated buildings. So this idea of finding a way to do a mock-up or at least a pre-finalized unit or 2 in your building can be really critical to a lot of the energy efficiency features that we see here. With that, I think I'm passing it back to Matt, and he's going to talk a little bit about the who.
All right, so who needs to be at the table? We've mentioned already a few times some of the various people. We're going to go through that, the why, what, and when, and finalize the who aspect right now and what's critical to your project. Having the right people at the meeting is absolutely vital. You have your design side of it, of those who are actually making the decisions of what gets implemented in the field. That is your architect, your HVAC engineer, your energy consultant, your developer. And then you have the implementation side, your sales staff, your key trades, And then you also have sort of your associated need-to-know side of the utility program, the property manager. And bringing in all those folks together and having an internal champion on energy efficiency is what makes this work. And that internal champion doesn't necessarily need to be the energy consultant. We've seen lots of examples where that is the architect themselves or the developer or someone from the developer's staff. That is really their focus, is that you're going for LEED or you're going for some advanced energy efficiency metric. But someone needs to be at the table that is that champion and seeing it through. But in the case where the champion is the energy consultant, oftentimes in sort of traditional design processes, the energy consultant isn't historically or traditionally part of the design team or seen that way. That truth is changing quickly. The energy consultant is a vital design element to an energy efficiency project. The same way the structural engineer needs to be there to tell you that this exposed concrete balcony you're putting out there is going to need to have a totally different concept of structural engineering to hold it up. Your energy efficiency consultant needs to be there to say that exposed concrete balcony is going to need thermal bridging, and is going to need to understand how that connects to the rest of the building. And we're going to need to plan out how to reach these efficiency goals with the right thickness of walls, the right types of windows and windows exposure and overhangs and coverage. Energy efficiency is a design element that needs to become built into the design process. So if you haven't done that before, this is an opportunity, as if your role is as an energy consultant, is to start bolstering your skills and expand and bundle your services and to become one of those design consultants. Be there at the table early, know the team's goals at the start, help set them, interact with the rest of the design team and the field personnel, help the trades have a voice, help them think ahead of time of, if you need to put insulation there against the roof deck, and then the plumber's going to come through later and put in a stink pipe that has to cut that away, how do we plan for that? How do we time that up and make sure the efficiency side of this, the envelope, the air sealing, the R value gets installed properly in the context of all the other work that's happening at the job site? And as we said before as well, energy modeling is most influential when you have it early. When you can see those scenarios, you can realize, stapling on a slightly higher efficiency water heater is a good way of getting some additional energy efficiency, but it's probably not the most cost effective and the most beneficial. And the kind of things you can change early, like the R value, like the overhangs, to get that into the design, those can be much more influential for a lower cost if you plan for them ahead of time. And you can sort of scope that out and tease out the exact details through energy modeling if you do it ahead of time. And so this brings forward that the energy consultant becomes a critical aspect of the consulting suite of project design. And that whole team then is focused on, where is the best place to focus these limited resources? How do we bring this team of professionals together and make sure that we are following through on the intentions ahead of time? So having that integrated design meeting or that early sort of pre-construction meeting with the right people at the table, making sure each one is on the same page as to what their role is, and that we are embedding all of these intentions into our work scopes and checking each other, that kind of concrete chain of intention and follow through is what really gets you through this process. And it needs kind of a consulting stylized approach to keep the organization and keep that on the table.
All right, so we're going to kind of get into the wrap-up portion here, where let's really kind of get this down to the few key takeaways that we really hope you'll be able to go with from today. So the first is the 4 things that jump out to Matt and I when we put this together. The first takeaway is start early in the process and include the key trades, right? So this is both part of the when and the who. The earlier you can start, the better off you're going to be, and the more of key trades. Now, this doesn't mean that the tile guy has to have the same kind of thing as the window girl, right? They may have very different impacts on the building. So be thinking about who your key trades are that are really going to impact the energy efficiency, or as Matt said earlier, the waste reduction or the comfort mechanics or anything else that you're planning on putting in place. Second, look at the operational elements such as sequencing, purchasing, scopes of work. When we take a look at those items, we can reduce our build times or at least prevent them from expanding. We can eliminate waste, and we can find the most cost competitive solutions. Really often the first blush at something as, oh sure, I've heard of those, they're really expensive. But when you bring these right people and you start thinking in terms of the operational side and you've got the smart people in, you can find a cost competitive solution to achieve the same goal. Next, add quality control checklists and inspections into your process. It begins to make your process easier to replicate, and it has the added benefit of likely reducing the absolute dirtiest word in construction, callbacks. So if change orders were one thing we don't want to hear, callbacks we want to hear even less. So having the quality control checklists and inspections built into your process is going to be really helpful. And then finally, document everything. Create feedback loops so that what you learn at the end or what you've learned through quality control during construction feeds back into the next design meetings, feeds back into the next rounds of energy modeling. When you're able to do this, this is a process that allows you to repeat it faster and faster and get more and more streamlined with every project you work on. So start early, look at the operationals, add QC, and document everything to make your process repetitive or iterative. Now we want to talk about how do we know that this is being successful? And I'm going to take a minute here to think about this from our program's perspective. Let's say of the 40 some of you who registered for this, 10 of you say, this actually makes sense to me. I want to put this in place. How do we do this? What are some things that would be definitions of success? Well, the first thing, if you can host an intentional design meeting or a design charrette, if you can commit to that, that is one of the key steps to success. Even if you've done nothing else yet, just getting the right people there early on to have these initial conversations is going to be a big win. Second, host a scope of work review. You get an internal coordinator, make sure that they're actually, or the energy consultant, make sure that they're actually looking at all the key trade scopes of work, looking with the purchasing agent, and ensuring that all these energy efficiency measures are actually going to be included. So those are two great signs of success that we can identify. But I have a sneaking suspicion that with the folks on the line, we can maybe reach out and have you tell us, what do you think would be a great way for us to identify that this has been successful? So this is going to start us opening up for questions and answers by us asking you a question first. Please use either the question box or raise your hand to be unmuted, and let us know what you think would be another great sign of success that this participants in this program are hearing this message. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie and Mecca to identify any calls, questions, or comments that come in.
Thank you, Dan. We'll give everybody just a minute to think about the question that you proposed. And as Dan had mentioned, please write in your answers or comments into the question box or raise your hand, and we are happy to unmute you.
So I can give you an example. As we were kind of designing this, something that someone brought up as an example would be, what if a design professional or developer reached out to our energy advisors and said, can you help me get this process started? That would be a really good sign of success, right? We have this staff that's ready, excited to help you out. All of you developers out there already know you already have an energy advisor that's working with you. So reaching out to our energy advisors to ask them for help to get started would be one great example of another sign of success.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, we're not seeing any come in through the question box or hands raised. So At this point, I'd love to thank everybody for joining us today. And as you're winding up your day and any other questions that come up, we've put Matt and Dan's contact information up here. And also, please visit the program website at OregonMultifamilyEnergy.com. That's where you can sign up for the monthly newsletter, which will have all of the registration information for future trainings. And we will also be posting all of our trainings on the website as well. Just a reminder that after the webinar today, once you click out of GoToWebinar, we do really value your feedback. So please take a few minutes just to answer a few questions about the training for today and also your interest for future trainings. So thanks again, everybody, for attending, and have a great rest of your day.